So I found out the other day, I wasn't even really aware of this, that I have done over 5,000 interviews in my career. And a lot of that was in the 9 years that I was producing and co-hosting a radio show. And now I am the showrunner and host of OWC Radio. But I also interview for my documentary films, for news, for television shows. It just depends. This is not. I don't know if you're an investigative journalist. Contact me, and I'll talk to you offline because that's a whole different thing. That's a whole different technique. It's like accosting people with the mic and trying to get them to say things and walking along with them in the street. And I have had to do that on occasion. It's not my forte, but I could give you some pointers about how it has or has not worked for me. The main thing with interviewing for me is, and I'm hoping you guys really love to do it. Do you love to do it? Are you doing it because you like it? Raise your hand if you are. Questioning, right? Not sure. Okay. Yeah. I'll give just a little bit of a background. I've been a director, cinematographer, DP, shooter on films and television. I've done Nat Geo interviews for the top 10 photographers, shot for Chasing Lightning, shot for Orphan Elephants, did a 12-part series for Discovery with custom motorcycles, merged with Lisa Rinna, worked at the studio where I had to do behind the scenes. I did a lot of behind the scenes shooting on major films. So I've worked with a lot of major actors over the years, and that's a whole different kind of interview, which we'll talk about today. So please feel free to turn your mics on and interrupt and ask questions because we're comfy. I've got my water here. You guys bring your coffee. We're just going to literally talk about what needs to happen. Um, I've worked on things like the James Bond movies and Yentl and the Rocky movies and a lot of travel videos. So that'll kind of give you an idea. You can probably ask me about just about anything. And I'm older than all of you, so I've probably been there and done that. And I'm still doing it. Okay, the first thing that I do is, and people don't realize on the other side how much time this takes, I do a lot of research. Whenever I interview somebody, I find out who they are, who they work with, what they do, what they like. I Google them. I talk to people who know them. I watch their movies. I watch anything that I can possibly find that they've done. And I know that takes a lot of extra time. But what that does is it makes me more comfortable that I know a little bit about who they are when I get to sit down on that interview. And I've also found that people really appreciate it. There are a lot of times if you're interviewing for, say, a major network, and the producer will hand you questions. Has that ever happened to any of you? Like you're handed these questions. Yesterday, I got from a PR person, I wish I had it in front of me, a 2-page typewritten single-spaced list of questions and answers that they wanted the talent to give. And the first thing I told the talent was, first of all, throw that away. We're going to pay attention to it. I'm going to honor what your PR person needs, but I'm not going to go by that. I don't want you to memorize your answers. I know you've read all of that. You're really comfortable. And the reason I'm talking with you today is because I know you know all of that, and we're just going to have fun. Okay. So that kind of put him for a moment a little bit nervous because he didn't have his cheat sheet in front of me. But what I did was, and what I do with all the interviews is I take a few minutes. I don't rush them. I leave 5 or 10 minutes at the beginning of every interview to have an informal conversation with them, if I possibly can. And what I say to them at that point is, look, what do you want to talk about? What's important to you? This is what I would like to accomplish with this, but let's spend a few minutes and I go over my talking points with them because I've done the research. I don't use a script when I ask questions. First of all, I can't read it and also maintain eye contact with them. So I don't use a script. I mostly do an outline or a lot of times I'll use a mind map. Do you guys ever use mind map? It kind of helps me get a feel for the story that I want to achieve. That's going to, especially if I'm working on a documentary, you have talking points that you really need to get. And sometimes you get them, most of the times you do, but every once in a while you don't. But I work with just outlines, just 2 or 3 words, because that allows me just to glance down at the page, and then I can look up and I can continue to ask them questions. It also allows me to really listen more carefully. If you maintain eye contact with the person that you're interviewing, it's personal. Basically you're developing a relationship with them. A lot of times when, especially like I notice when I'm being interviewed, people will come in, they'll have their questions, they sit down, there's a crew all around you, and they've got the lights and they've got the equipment, and it's hustle and bustle, and then they sit down and they go, okay. And then they ask you the first question, and you don't have time to kind of settle in and figure out, who are they? Who are you? What are they going to ask you? Who are these people all around you? You're distracted. Maybe there's last looks and makeup and hair, which I hate, and all that stuff going on. So it's just really, really uncomfortable. And then I become very self-conscious. I don't like being interviewed myself, so I could put myself in their shoes, right? So I tell them not to memorize. I don't have a script. I use an outline, and I try to maintain eye contact, because the minute you break eye contact with the person you're interviewing, they remember that they're being interviewed, and their mind goes off of talking with you and turning it into a conversation. And then it turns into a formal interview. They start worrying about what they want to say, how they want to say it. They're worried about what the people back at the head office are going to say. You want them to forget about all of that and just kind of have, it's like that sitting at the bar, asking them questions and having a conversation is the best you could possibly do, I think, with any interview. And that pretty much goes for any type of interview. There's a couple of other types of interviews we'll talk about in a minute. So the first thing I do is I sit down and I tell them that I'm here for them, that I want to tell their story, and I appreciate them taking time to talk to me about what their story is, right? And so that places it on them. It's not about me. It's not my ego. And do I look good on camera? And am I coming across well? Because it's really, people don't care about the interviewer. They want to hear and see the person that's being interviewed, right? So I talk to them about what the major talking points are going to be. So I go over everything with them from soup to nuts, just the headlines, what we're going to cover. And I also tell them something that a lot of people don't do. And this is just me. You may not agree, but this is what I do in every interview. I tell them if they don't like what we're talking about, they can just say, I don't want to talk about that. And then I immediately stop. I don't force them. This is not, like I said, investigative journalism. This is a very personal piece. So if they don't like what I'm talking about, I stop. And I give them the courtesy of not doing that. And I also tell them that if they say something during the interview and they realize maybe they should not have said it, to let me know and I'll edit it out. Now I have the luxury of doing that, and it's worked for me in the past. And I think it's why a lot of people who don't want to be interviewed agree, because they know I'm going to respect them. There's a major music group, which I can't really talk about right now, but they're doing their first album in almost 20 years, and they've not announced it. And they've agreed to interview with me because they know they can trust me. I'm not going to ask them anything they can't talk about. And that brings me to the other thing. You don't want to ever break an embargo. Don't rush to be the first person out with that interview. It's not that important. I mean, if you work for a news agency and they want to be first up, and it's like, I don't know, the New York Times or the Washington Post or something, and they want to be first up with the interview, that's up to your editor. But I just think if you agree to embargo an interview, then you have to honor that. I did one yesterday that I have to hold until the afternoon of the 12th. And I've promised them I would do that. If I don't honor that, I'm never going to get an interview with anybody at that company again. They just won't. And so, because I like talking to people, I don't want that to happen. Right. Does anybody have any questions so far? Anything you want to bring up? Okay. So let's talk for a minute about working with PR people, because that happens a lot, right? They're the gatekeepers, they're the handlers, they're the people that have a lot at stake. They're the ones trying to wrangle the interview and make sure you don't say something you're not supposed to say. I'm always very respectful of them, and I talk with them ahead of time, and I find out what they want and what they don't want, and I honor that. I really do honor that. Otherwise, I just say, well, you know what? It's not going to work. I'm not going to do it. And then I don't do it. There's nothing that is important enough for me to break that courtesy and that mutual respect. Somebody else can do it, because I'm not going to. It's my professional reputation on the line. And it's just more fun when everybody's relaxed, right? So I just tell them, if it's not going to work, then it's not going to work. And thank you very much. But I also try to explain to them, well, this might be uncomfortable, but maybe this is a way for your client to, in a very comfortable situation, and that's what I mean by get comfy, it's comfortable for them to address some of the negativity that might be happening, some of the gossip that might be happening, in an atmosphere where they're not going to be browbeaten or yelled at or drilled into. And then I let them think about it, and we'll talk about it, and then we'll decide whether or not they want to continue and whether or not that line of questioning is okay. A lot of times, these people that you're interviewing really do want their side of the story to be told, but they're so tired, especially in the atmosphere in our country right now. They're just tired of being yelled at and browbeaten, and they want to talk to somebody that is going to let them get a word in edgewise. You can always make your own point, but I always do it with respect. So 5 or 10 minutes before you start, have that conversation. Make sure everybody's thinking about the same things, everybody's comfortable. And then I start with the easy stuff. I personally like to talk to somebody that I'm going to get to know. I think of this as a relationship. So I just ask them, what was life like when you were little? Where were you raised? What was your family like? I ask them personal questions because that's easy for them to talk about most of the time. And then that kind of gets them comfortable, right? So what did you like to do when you were 5 years old? And a lot of times that will bring you into the creative side of them, and they'll start talking about, well, I love to play with, I collected, what are those little cars that the little boys collect, what do they call, the matchbox cars, right? Well, I talked to a racing car driver who was just 5 years old, used to love to play with matchbox cars. I talked to another designer who used to build cardboard doll houses when she was a tiny little girl and dress them and add the decorations. And so you find out a lot about people, and then you kind of get them talking about themselves, and they're liking it. They're really enjoying it. And these are all sort of empathy questions, but I think in order to be a good interviewer, you really do need to be empathetic. I think if that's a quality that you have as a person, you're going to be really successful at this. So the easy stuff. And then I always ask them, and this is just an easy question that I use a lot. So tell people, where are we and what's happening here today? And if they go, well, I'm sitting here interviewing with you, I go, but no, what are you working on? Where are we? Are we in Philadelphia? Are we in New York? Are we in DC? And what's going on around you? Tell us a little bit about what your life is right now. So that sets the scene for the audience that's going to be listening to the interview. And it also puts them in a comfortable place because they can talk about what's going on with them. That's also a really good question. And I learned this from the executive producer on a show that I was shooting. It was a series called Volunteer Challenges. It was for Columbia Television, and it had a lot of racing. And so we were having to run or climb or go underwater and meet people on the beach. And you only had, with these athletes, you only had literally seconds to get some kind of a sound bite from them, right? So I'm running alongside of them with the camera and I'm going, where are you and what's happening here today? And they're going, well, we're in the high desert and I'm trying to win this GD race. I go, well, what do you think your prospects are? And by that time, they're probably ahead of me, but I get an answer, even if it's yelling back behind me. Right. And I've got the interview for the studio. At least they know that's all I could get, but I got the main stuff. So that where are you and what's happening here today is one of my questions that I've taught a lot of people to use, and they all love it. It really does work. So it either works when, like, it worked with Barbara Streisand, because she was running in, she didn't want to do an interview, she was tired. We had the Yentl premiere, and I told the what we did was we grouped the interviews and we recorded it, and then we gave it to everybody. And I told the main person who was doing the interviews in the PR line going into the theater, this was for the premiere of Yentl many years ago. I said, listen, just ask her, where are you and what's happening here today? And so she answered that question. Meanwhile, then I ran into the theater and yelled at her and told her to come back out because people had been waiting for hours and they needed to get answers to some questions, and please, please, please. And finally talked her into doing it. But at least we knew that at that point, the TV networks would have at least gotten a close-up of Barbara and at least one quick question. So that's kind of like the emergency go-to question for that kind of thing. My ground rules are be kind. And that gets you very far with people. Be friendly. That gets you even further with people. And just relax and be yourself. Like, I'm a bit of a geek. I mean, I'm like, I always joke around with my friends, once a cheerleader, always a cheerleader. And I have this crazy sense of humor. And yeah, I'm really smart, but it's kind of like that Legally Blonde syndrome, right? But I've learned over the years, that's just who I am. And people either get it or they don't. Now, each one of you here, and I'm looking right at you, I'm looking at your faces, you all have different personalities. Right? I don't know. And I would like you to tell me what kind of things you're working on. Do we want to take a minute for each of you just to tell me that very quickly, what you're working on, what kind of interviews you do? Do we want to unmute everybody and we'll just go around the room? Let's see. Cirina?
I'm interviewing scientific experts for a documentary I'm developing.
That's awesome. And Daria?
I'm actually on the other side. I'm the one who gets interviewed.
Right. Okay. So I'm giving away all of our secrets.
No. So it's really interesting for me to just understand and it's super.
Yeah.
I actually have an interview tomorrow morning, so it's also very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
We'll talk about that too. What do you do that you're being interviewed about?
I'm an inventor. I run a research, like a future lab in New York City.
Oh, nice.
I was a scientist at MIT earlier, and then at Amazon. And last 7 years, I run sort of a moonshot lab in New York City.
Oh, nice.
I already see you working me into into an interview mode. Okay,
I'm sneaking in there. I want you on my radio show.
Okay.
I do a show called OWC Radio about technology and creativity. So I would love to have you on the show. We will talk about being interviewed in a moment too. How about you, Stefan?
Oh, well, I used to work at Adobe, and I did a lot of interviews with creatives about their process and their inspiration. And then I would write up the article, the interview. And I know one thing I always learned that you haven't brought this up yet, but is ask a question that doesn't have an easy yes answer or no answer.
Yes.
That way you get a real response, not just yes or no to something, especially for video. You want more than just yes, and then
absolutely
nothing goes from there. But I am now no longer at Adobe. I was laid off, and so I'm in between jobs. So I'm going to be interviewed by other people, hopefully. And I'm trying to think of like techniques I can use to make that process less stressful for them and for me.
Yeah.
By just making it a very comfortable conversation and not like just sort of a question, answer situation where which can be stressful and kind of rote after a while.
It's stressful for both people, really. And one of the things that I want to talk about today is listening to each other. A lot of people that have interviewed me or I've watched doing interviews have those questions and they'll just read them and they won't listen to the answer and they'll just go on to the next question. Well, there's oftentimes very subtle clues that one party or the other can give to each other. And you have to know how to pivot. You have to be so comfortable just talking to that person that you have to know how to pivot. And it's like Roger Donaldson of The Cure, right? I was interviewing him and it's about, it was during the pandemic and how are you doing and what are you writing and when's the band going on tour again, which they just did. And he was talking all about that. And I don't even remember how we got into it, but I found out that he'd written a ballet. And had I stayed to the planned conversation, I never would have found that out. And that he was actually looking for somebody to produce the ballet that he had written. And I thought, that's wonderful. So if you're interviewing like scientific people who are, and let me ask Bryce, what do you do?
I'm a video producer, editor, but I also teach, I'm a college professor also. So I have that self-awareness of needing to be able to verbalize how I do what I do. So I thought this would be good. But yeah, I definitely feel like how you set it up, especially if there's a camera over your shoulder, is super critical. And you've got to try to figure out how to get them to open up a little bit. So I love the pointers you're giving us.
Yeah, sit as close to the camera. You know this. Sit as close to the camera as you possibly can. I mean, it feels like you're literally hugging that thing because you want your eye line and you want them to look at you. You don't want them looking into the camera. That's really scary for anybody, even for professional actors. Now, I worked on a movie with Charlie Sheen and I was doing behind the scenes and he was actually using our camera for his eye. Well, I was shooting. I was using my camera for his eye line. I think eye line's really important. The other thing is, I try to get everybody out of that room that doesn't need to be there. I don't need looky-loos in there. This is a private conversation. It's personal. It's private. Please give us this half hour or 20 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever it is. Just let me talk to them. If you want to monitor it, go to Video Village. If you insist on being in the room, please just stand over to the side so that you are not in their eye line. Because if they look over at you, then I have to ask them the question again, because it breaks the synergy between us, right? Even like I'm looking at the camera now because I want you guys to think I'm looking right at you. I'm not. And I don't like that because it's uncomfortable for me. But if I look over here, look at the difference, right? I'm looking right at you.
I noticed that. I was going to say you do a great job of looking at me.
Yeah, I'm looking at you, but it doesn't look like I'm looking at you really, right? And I think that like any conversation, you don't want somebody sitting there having a conversation with you, like talking on their phone and So when you have your questions and you keep looking now, I have an outline of what I want to cover and I don't want to take up more than what time is it? I guess.
I was just about to say,
almost done. Wow. Okay. All right.
You are the star for the next one, so we can extend a few little minutes, and then I can.
Okay.
The room.
Yeah. So scientific interviews. What I love to do with scientists is they're all very creative. Science is creative. People who code are incredibly creative. Accountants have to be creative. They have to know the creative process in order to put the budgets together, right? Or in order to know whether the budgets are comfortable. So like yesterday, I was interviewing an engineer about this new, I can't say what it was. It's a new thing, right? It's a tiny little thing. And I started joking around with him about, God, you've got me curious. I want to open that thing up and see what's inside because all I do is pick it up and use it, but I want to know what's under the hood. And so then he laughed. It made him literally laugh. And it kind of relaxed him because now he's in his comfort zone, right? if you're being interviewed, Stefan, about potentially some new ventures, all you can do is be yourself. You have an incredible background. You just be yourself and ask them, put it back at them in a way, because even though they're interviewing you, they're kind of nervous about, am I asking him the right questions? Am I going to get to know him? Am I going to walk away from this making the right decision? So I would spend a minute in that case turning it around and asking them, what do you need? What are your goals? What's a win-win for you? We had a huge meeting yesterday, 9 people in a Zoom meeting. But I basically said to everybody, let's spend a minute and talk about what's a win for, if it was 4 different companies coming together in a big venture. I said, what's a win-win for everybody? And then let's figure out how we can all get together and solve that together, right? And Bryce, when you're teaching, for me, the hard part about teaching is you know it so well, you don't know what to say, right? What do they know? What do they not know? I mean, am I covering it all?
Right.
So I think the main thing is listen, be able to pivot, be able to go back to what you want to accomplish. The racing thing I told you about, make sure you're solving everybody's goals, make sure you're taking really good care of them. And I always think about these interviews as me being in service to them. It's not about me. And I always try to surprise them with something that I've learned about them that they might not know that I know. And they love that because they know that I'm vested in this. And I think about it as an interviewee, as a relationship. And I don't think we have too much time, do we?
No, I'm afraid we have to leave.
You know what? I hope this was helpful. I care
Yeah.
about you guys. And if you want to contact me, please feel free. You can email me to Cirina@catania.us. You can visit my website at CirinaCatania.com. You can Google me for the good stuff. I'm doing a documentary called The Purple Heart. So you can go to purpleheartmovie.com or go to OWC Radio. Please listen to those interviews. And I'm also working on an educational outreach to high schoolers called the High School Media Collective, which is a nonprofit. And I guess, I just wish you all the best. Laugh, have fun, and report back to me. We'll talk about physical setup the next time. Okay. And always follow up with a thank you to your people, because that's your network. Okay.